Hey guys, this is Bex from the Tiny Fibre Studio podcast, and in this video I want to show you the process that I've been going through for spinning singles, specifically for the Doodler shawl, but this would obviously apply to spinning singles for anything else. Part of the reason that I wanted to do this is that this is all part of my journey. Last year I only knit with my own handspun for the whole year, and this was one of the projects which I had started to prepare but hadn't sort of finished. I have already spun these two. So I've got a golden yellow and a sort of dark, slightly slate grey. I love them both. They're really nice and squishy, but I wanted to talk about the process that I went through to get those and what I'm doing to complete my final colour of yarn, which is this one here. So these will be my Doodler shawl. I guess the first thing is to think about how I originally started with this fibre. So what I had here was merino. I think I went through kind of a bad phase when it came to actually labelling my fibre, but I'm fairly sure this is merino. Tip, label your fibre, it does make it a lot easier to work with. I had a particular amount of this left and I wanted to make the doodler. So what I did was to figure out the proportions of yarn in each colour that were required in the pattern, and then I just basically divided the amount of fibre that I had by that same set of proportions. I then hand dyed the fibre and I'm now just spinning it into singles. Originally I'd been thinking about spinning it to ply, but as I was spinning, I think these were the first ones, as I was spinning this, intending for it to be plied, I kind of realised that actually I was kind of in love with the idea of actually spinning it as a singles yarn. So I stopped as far as I'd got on this bobbin, wound that all off. That I think just got chucked out because I wasn't very far through it. And then I started spinning it again specifically as singles. So if you're looking to do the same, if you want to do a little bit of single spinning specifically for a project, this video is intended to help you with the process that I went through. I am not the world's leading expert in spinning singles, but we're all on a journey here, so I hope that sharing this information will help you on yours. So the first thing that I did was to consult some resources on the subject. I have what I would consider to be a reasonably decent spinner's library, at least modern spinning books. So there were a few of those that I consulted. Couple of options. So the Spinner's Book of Yarn Designs by Sarah Anderson is a good resource. It does talk initially about spinning for plying. So when you get into the spinning singles section, it's actually called Spinning for Plying. And you kind of think, well, what if I don't want to ply it? But I would say that pages 68 and 69, where they talk about spinning fat singles, can equally be applied to spinning thinner singles as well. So 68 and 69 in Spinner's Book of Yarn Designs is a good little resource. The one that I really used a lot was Ply Magazine's singles issue from winter 2015. This is one of those things that I really love about Ply Magazine, because a lot of times in books that are more general about spinning, like the Spinner's Book of Yarn Designs, you have 2 pages really in that book which are specifically about spinning consistent singles. Whereas Ply Magazine can do basically a whole issue on single spinning. In particular, one of the articles that I really liked in this one was called The Bias Point. It starts on page 34 and it's by Elizabeth Watts, and she basically did a whole load of different samples, spinning various thicknesses of singles, spinning different amounts of twist and so on, and then she produced this massive chart that shows what kind of sample it was, how many wraps per inch it was, what the fresh ply twist angle was, all of this stuff. The great thing about this is that it gives you a starting point if you're trying to spin singles that are high twist or low twist, or you want bias or you don't want bias. This gives you a starting point to sample from. So that was one of the many articles in Ply Winter 2015 that I found really, really useful. So I'd highly recommend getting hold of that. You can get the print copy, or you can also get it digitally as well. So the digital download is a good option if you don't happen to have a Ply magazine stockist anywhere near you, which I don't. One of the other things that I also referred to was Yarn Texture by Gillian Moreno, and there were quite a few things in here that I wanted to look at from a technical perspective, particularly things like twist angle and grist and that kind of stuff. Again, in here, mostly what she's referring to is spinning singles in order to ply them, but there is a bit at the bottom of page 75 that talks about spinning if you're going to be leaving those singles as singles and not plying them. And then it also refers to pages 98 and 124. Page 124 is about whether you should weight your yarn when you're setting the twist. Basically, the answer is if you're knitting with it, don't. But there are some interesting examples where she shows why that's the case. And then on page 98, there's also a section about spinning singles for knitting, and it shows the kind of control cards that she sets up. So I referred to my resources and I found those articles and those books that would be useful, and tried to absorb as much of that knowledge as I possibly could. But ultimately, books are all very well, but it pretty much comes down to sampling with your chosen yarn. I will admit, before we start, that merino is possibly not the best fibre for spinning singles. However, that's what I had, that's what I wanted to use. The reason why it's not always so brilliant to do singles from merino is because it's quite a short staple fibre, and the shorter the fibre, the more ends are going to be kind of loose if you're doing a relatively low twist yarn like a singles, and they're also not going to be wrapped up in the ply twist as they would be in a plied yarn. So that basically means that there's more ends poking out of the yarn, and therefore it's more likely to pill. I can probably live with that. Regardless of that, I still felt like it was going to be an interesting experiment to do. So the next thing I did was to start to sample with my fibre. Now, this fibre has been in storage for roughly about a year, and it's not in the greatest of condition. It is a little bit compacted, but it's not felted. There is a difference. If I try and pull on this fibre, I'm not really getting anywhere, so it is fairly compacted, but there is a little bit of movement in it, and all it really needs is for me to just fluff the fibre slightly, so just pull my hands apart and stretch the fibre horizontally. Once I've done that, then I can draft much, much, much more easily. Some people will pre-draft fibre. I'm not generally in the pre-drafting camp. I think that whenever I pre-draft, I tend to kind of overdo it, and then there's not as many overlapping ends when it comes to actually drafting it when it's going into the spinning wheel. So that's why I don't pre-draft. But I do just do this fluffing up of the fibre. And if necessary, I might also split it. So in this particular case, it is compacted enough that I have been splitting the fibre as well. So with splitting, you can normally see a little bit of a sort of seam down the middle of the fibre, and you can just pull the fibre apart like that. And you could do that all the way down the braid, or you could just do a little section at a time, which for the purposes of this video, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to fluff out the fibre, and then I should be able to pull a chunk of fibre off, and I'm going to put the rest of that to one side. I'll come back to that later on. A lot of people feel that you can tell which way fibre has been prepared by which end drafts more easily. I tend to think that's true when it comes to, it's definitely true when it comes to hand-combed top, but when it's mill-prepped top, I'm not totally convinced on that one. I think the machinery kind of mixes it up a lot more. And so I can't always tell, to be honest, which way it's gone. But one of the tricks that a lot of spinning teachers teach is to hold it in between your fingers and just rub your fingers up and down. And then whichever end you come to is the end that you should draft from. So that's a little trick. You can try that and see if that works for you. So there we go. That is my fibre pretty much prepped. As I say, just pulled apart a little bit, but not pre-drafted because I don't want to take out the opportunity to draft as I'm actually spinning the fibre. As you're going through it, you might also find, as I have in this case, there are some much more compacted sections at the side of my braid. I'm actually just going to pull those off either as I spot them now or as I spot them when I'm actually spinning, because those will just end up in your yarn and they're going to end up annoying you because there'll be little slubby bits. So I just get rid of those at this point. Next thing is to just thread up the spinning wheel. So I'm using my Hanson Crafts mini spinner. If you're using a traditional wheel, you want to probably start from a fairly large whirl or pulley because you don't want too many twists per inch. So you generally want to start with a slightly larger whirl. In the case of the mini spinner, I've got the dial set to probably about 9 o'clock at this stage, and I haven't got too much break tension on, just enough to have the yarn actually draw in, but not so much that it's tugging it, because keep in mind that if you're spinning singles with the intention of them staying as singles, they're going to have less twist than they would if you were considering plying them, and you don't want the fibre to just be pulled apart by the break tension. So make sure that you don't have too much break tension on, and obviously you can adjust that as necessary. So I'm spinning this clockwise. I've never really experimented, to be honest, that much with spinning clockwise and plying anti-clockwise or vice versa. I just tend to do what I guess I've received as wisdom. Whether it's actually any good or not, I don't know, but I'm spinning in the clockwise direction. So I'm going to start my mini spinner, and that speed is probably a little bit much, so I'm going to turn it down a tiny bit. I leave my leader on the wheel all the time so that I've got something to just attach it to, and there's a little loop in my leader that allows me to actually loop the fibre through. Now what I found was that trying to keep the consistency of my yarn, I wanted a fingering weight singles. So what I've tried to do is to keep the fingering weight fairly consistent, and I tended to find that using short backwards draw rather than short forward draw made it easier for me to keep it a fairly consistent yarn. No idea why, but it did, so I'm going to stick with that. So I'm just doing pinch, pull back, pinch, pull back, pinch, pull back. As I'm feeding this in right now, it's not spiraling back on itself or anything like that past the first few lots of drafting. So I think we're pretty good. And this is where I would say if you have pre-drafted your fibre, this is where you might start having problems, because you may start getting thick and thin spots where you haven't allowed enough overlap of fibres because it was pre-drafted. So I'm just doing a little short backward draw. And there we go. So I've spun a little bit now. Kind of felt like I was getting into a bit of a rhythm there. So the next thing that I might want to do as a sort of purposeful, intentional spinning method is to make sure that I've got a control card. So if I'm happy with this yarn, I'm going to make a control card. But the only way I'm going to know if I'm happy with it is if it conforms to what I'm looking for from my project. The way to think about this is, first of all, do you have a commercial yarn in your stash that you could compare it to? Keep in mind, you're not going to get the full character of the yarn until you've set the twist. So that could be important. That's why you want to sample a reasonable amount first. You want to have something to be able to compare this to. So it would be useful to know which yarn is used in the pattern and what weight that yarn is, what its construction is, and so on and so forth. For example, in my case, I'm trying to replicate fingering weight yarn. So I've got my spinner's control card here, which just shows me the number of wraps per inch, but in a single line format. So when I'm taking samples from this, I always try to make sure that I take samples from what's actually on the bobbin, because keep in mind, if there is yarn here coming out of your orifice, that hasn't had all of its twist yet. So you want to make sure that if you can, you go by what's on the bobbin as opposed to what's outside the orifice. So I'm just going to pull a little bit off here. And even though this is singles, it's coping perfectly well with me pulling it off the bobbin like that. So I would just lay my yarn over my wraps per inch tool, and I would be able to see how close I am to my fingering weight aim yarn. And I think it's pretty good. It's kind of between about 14 and 12. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. The other thing that I would want to try to keep consistent is the amount of twist angle. This is something that's actually kind of hard to see on singles yarn, because your eyes kind of go funny trying to look at all the different twists. But what you can do for the sake of consistency is to just do a little 2-ply ply back as you would with any other yarn, and you'll find that you get very, very, very airy fibre like this. But at least you can count the number of bumps, and then you can use that as a control for your spinning as you go through the project. So if I was happy with that, I would then tie this off and actually break it off from the bobbin. And you might think, oh no, but she's destroying what she's already put on the bobbin. It's fine, I can spin more. That's the whole point of spinning, so we can spin more. So I would undo that from the bobbin, just break it off. And then if I'm lucky, it might actually pull through the orifice. Is it going to come through? I don't think it is. I think it's separated. I lose this time. I lose. Sometimes it kind of wraps around itself enough that you can just pull it through the orifice. No matter, I have my orifice hook here, so I'll just grab that little end and pull it back through. The quality of your joins is really important in single spinning, because there's not much room for error. So you want to try and make sure that you do some really, really nice joins. If you're not very good at joins, which sometimes I'm not, then it's a good opportunity to practice, isn't it? So I just make sure that I've kind of fluffed out the end of the spun yarn, so there's something for the unspun yarn to cling onto, and then I try to do a sideways join, just let a couple of fibres just kind of catch on there. Let the twist run in, and then we're back And that was a pretty decent join. I'm quite happy with that. What you'll probably find is that after a really short period of time, you'll probably get into a little bit of a rhythm with this. The problem is that sometimes your brain can kind of deceive you, and your brain goes, yeah, you're absolutely spinning exactly the same as you did last time, when actually you're not really. So that's why it's so important to have that control and to be able to refer back to the control so that you can see, you know, whether you're happy with your yarn or not. I'm using the woolly winder on the Hanson Crafts mini spinner at the moment. It's my preferred flyer. I like it because it's just totally mindless. You can just sit here and spin and spin and spin and spin and spin for ages, and it'll be absolutely fine. But it does mean that it doesn't kind of draw in the same way that a normal flyer would. You almost sort of need to consider when you want to give the fibre or the yarn to the wheel, rather than the wheel just kind of taking it from you. And sometimes that pull can be quite strong, but if it is really strong, if the flyer kind of pulls the yarn out of your hands before you're ready, then first of all, look at your break tension. Secondly, with a woolly winder, just make sure that your woolly winder is really clean, which may mean disassembling it, but that's good maintenance. You are a good woolly winder owner if you do a bit of cleaning every so often, because most of the time the problem is fibres getting trapped in the mechanism, and that's what causes it to do really, really strong pull-ins. I'm probably only drafting back maybe about an inch each draft, because it's a fairly short stapled fibre, and I want to make sure that I'm not going past the length of the staple, otherwise I'm going to end up with a thin section, and I'm trying to make this as consistent as possible. Every so often I'll just stop and just take a little bit of yarn off the bobbin and just do that little ply back test again, see if I'm getting something roughly similar to my control. And you can see there, I'm really happy with the consistency of that actually. And if I put it next to this one, you can see that it's really consistent in terms of the number of bumps per inch and the weight of the yarn. So that's something that you would be wise to check every so often, because I have definitely sat down after maybe a day or so off, or even a few hours off from a particular project, and because your body is feeling different, you know, you're feeling tired, you're feeling energetic, whatever it might be, it changes how you spin, and it can change it quite drastically. So I always try to make sure that I do that sample test every so often. I would also recommend that if it's a long-term project, that you put this sample on a card. I have a little set of cards inside this thing. This is actually a Project Life album by Becky Higgins. I think the album's actually from Snap Stories, Simple Stories, something along those lines. And I have little cards in there for each of the yarns that I'm spinning. So there's a section here for the singles that I was spinning and the control for that. A couple of other things that you can also do for control, which can be really useful when it comes to working with precise amounts of fibre or trying to produce precise amounts of yarn, is using a grist measurement. I'll do another video that explains all about grist and how you calculate yards per pound, but essentially it is the calculation of how many yards per pound are you going to get of that particular fibre if you spin it that particular way. And it normally involves taking a certain length of your yarn, weighing it, and then multiplying it up. I'm not being that fussy, to be honest, about grist on this project, but it is very useful when it comes to weighing my finished skeins and figuring out how long they're going to be and how many yards per pound they are. In terms of the finishing process, the way that I've been finishing these is, because they're merino and because I know they're a fairly short staple, I've been giving them a hot bath, cold bath, hot bath treatment. That slightly fulls the yarn and it will make the fibres kind of stick together a little bit better. There'll be less chance of it pilling, but even so, it's still merino. It probably will pill a little bit, but as I say, it's a risk I'm prepared to take with this one. It's a calculated risk. Fulling is a good way to try to make your singles yarns a little bit more durable. And as I'm going through, I'm really, really picky about slubs or any kind of inconsistencies in the fibre. So if I come to a section that I can feel is a little bit slubby or there's a little bit of a pill in there, that pill comes out before it goes into my drafting triangle, because otherwise it is going to come back and bite you. At some point you'll be knitting with that yarn and you'll be thinking, oh, I wish I just took the 2 seconds to pull that little pill out and get rid of it. Because now I can see the impact of that pill multiplied in my finished project and it really annoys me. So try and just pick out any pills or inconsistencies in your fibre as you go along. And I think that's pretty much it. I just wanted to be able to kind of share this project with you, give you an idea of some of the planning that I did, some of the resources that I used, and some of my tips and tricks when it comes to spinning singles, the things that have worked for me. What I would love to know is, have you spun any singles yet? Have you knitted with them? And how did you find that process? Do you have any little tips and tricks you want to share? I would love to know if this video has been useful to you. So please feel free to hit the like button or leave a comment. Also, I am planning on doing a lot more videos like this, more kind of instructional videos, as well as the podcast episodes. So please feel free to hit the subscribe button if you'd like to be kept up to date with what I'm doing and to be alerted when I have new videos. I'd also really like to do some live spin-alongs. I need to get some equipment sorted out before I can do that, so stay tuned for those, but hit the subscribe button if you want to be informed about those as well. And in the meantime, I hope that was useful and I will see you again soon on another video.